start in chapter 8, verse 4. Man, see how far we get. Anybody thinks I can get to verse 6 of chapter 9? Okay. The first part of verse 4. Let me read that. They set up kings without my consent. They choose princes without my approval. All right, let me just tell you that 1 Samuel 8 is a pretty interesting chapter about Israel wanting a king. So you can look that over sometime when you get a chance. But what kind of leader did God initially want for Israel to have? What's the word for it? They weren't kings. They were judges. That's what God wanted them to have. But what did the people say about that? They said both of those things. We want a king so we can be like everybody else. Tall, yeah. As it turns out, that was a detriment. Saul was like up here compared to me, and he was a bad, crazy king. So, but, yeah. You know, the judges were no bargain. That's no. The first ones were, who were they? They were, who were the first judges? Samuel's kids? They were all bums. Anyway, but they said they wanted a king, and God said, okay, you can have a king. He even told them what kind of problems they could expect. But he did not give up his sovereign power to choose a king for them. You want a king, I'll give you a king, but I'm going to choose who he is. That was the plan. Not only would a king be political and administrative by the way God sees it, but it would also be he would also be a religious leader as well. I don't mean, when I say religious, I don't mean religious in the sense that doing things to make their way into God's good graces, but a leader who would lead the people to God through love and wholehearted devotion. Religion is a problem. We're going to talk about that a little bit in a minute. So what happened? They took the whole process away from God, and as a result, they chose the worst possible leaders they could possibly have. The Northern Kingdom, I've told you before, had 9 different dynasties of kings that were all bad. There were no good ones in the whole bunch. Okay? So the second half of verse 4 says, with their silver and gold they make idols for themselves to their own destruction. They didn't want the people, the leaders of the Northern Kingdom, didn't want the people going to the south to worship. So they built their own temples, and they designed their own gods to have up there. And in fact, they had 2 golden calves. You remember what a fiasco that was? I've mentioned this several times before, but this was a big deal. You know, they had one in the Exodus, and that was an awful situation. Well, they had 2 in the Northern Kingdom. And I might add that the silver and gold that was used to make their idols was a gift from God. That was one of the things that really aggravated God. That we've been seeing all the way through here, that when God would give them something like fertile crops and fertile land and all those things, they were giving Baal the credit. So it was a problem. So now I want to ask you if you know what the law of unintended consequences is. I wrote it up here this week. You know what it is? Let me give you an example. The situation with David and Bathsheba. How'd that start? With a little secret sin. Nobody's going to get hurt. It's just me and Bathsheba. What did it lead to? It led to deceit, and it led to murder, and it led to a totally dysfunctional household for David the entire time he was alive. So he started with some secret that nobody knew about, and it led to that. With respect to the people in the northern kingdom, they gave a little, in other words, a little compromise on beliefs in the beginning, and their little compromise led to a major pagan belief system where Yahweh could not be identified separately from Baal. It started out probably just a little bit of nothing in the beginning. We still got God, we got Baal. And as time went on, compromises were made, and they just kept getting more and more unidentified. What about the United States? We have given what seemed like a little when prayer was taken out of the schools. Okay? I mean, that's a big deal, and we might have even squawked about it at the time. But it progressed to the point where God's name was outlawed, where you can't even speak it, really. 50 years later, you see what the real consequence of the sin is a country where God can hardly be recognized in our culture. Not you, and not me, but our culture does not recognize God. Not the God of the Bible, but a God of their own design. I know of no Christian who is happy with the cultural values as they are now, but Henry Missler says this: we have no right to bemoan the loss of what we have declined to defend. Our leaders are a reflection of us. They come out of us. We elect them. So whatever we get is because it's what we wanted. They come from us. All right, let me keep going. Verse 5. Throw out your golden calf idol, O Samaria. My anger burns against them. How long will they be incapable of purity? God is almost speechless with anger. When he says his anger burns, these golden calves may be the height of idolatry, complete violation of the second commandment, the graven image. We could look that up, but it's not just God, but it's anything related to God. Don't make any images of things that are in heaven. Don't make any images of things on earth. And don't make any images of things that are under the water. It's not just God, but everything about him. Don't do that. And they did all of those things. Then he says, how long can Israel continue this in this impure state, in this impurity? We'll see what happens in verse 6. Verse 6 says, they're from Israel. This calf a craftsman has made it. It is not God. It will be broken to pieces, that calf of Samaria. They are from Israel. I think God is saying they're from Israel. It's not, you don't get the right voice inflection when you read it. But he's saying they're from Israel. They're my chosen people. I think God is saying, after delivering them from Egypt, they have accepted my grace and being led out of Egypt. Now they have spurned my grace in creating idols. It's their way of life. It's their culture in the northern kingdom to have idols. It's not just like a little bit like it was in the Exodus, although it was pretty serious. Now it's all the time, 24/7. As a result, that calf and all other gods will be broken. By the way, the mention of Samaria there is the capital of the northern kingdom. All right, verse 7. They sow the wind and reap the whirlwind. The stalk has no head, it will produce no flower. Were it to yield grain, foreigners would swallow it up. After 200 years of rejecting God through idolatry, they've had 2,000 years of reaping the whirlwind as a wandering Jew. 200 years led to 2,000 years of wandering. They started by being conquered by Assyria. Same thing happened to the southern kingdom by being conquered with Babylon. So they have no country. They're wandering. They go through the same thing with the Medes and the Persians. They go through the same thing with the Greeks and with the Romans. And not until 1948 does anything start to be settled for them. So that's 2,000 years of reaping that whirlwind that came from Assyria. In Israel, the wheat and corn stalks were dried and empty. Now, anybody get raised on a farm, get out on a farm, you know what a wheat stalk looks like? You know what a corn stalk looks like? These would be like dried and empty. Lest you wonder about this, the King James says, it has no stalk. No stalk. The stalk has no something. And it will produce no meal. So you just got an empty stalk. Huh? Yeah, that's right. It's just an empty stalk. And should it produce something, should they have some grain, some kind of harvest where there's not much, somebody's going to take it from them. That would be Assyria. So that's what they've got to look forward to. Okay, verse 8. Verse 8 says, Israel is swallowed up. Now she is among the nations like a worthless thing. Israel has sought through alliances which have failed. Now she's alone. The alliances were with ungodly nations. Their foreign policy is part of God's indictment against them. You know, Isaiah, we've never really talked about this, but Isaiah was against military might because it takes away from trust in God. Could we sit here knowing Russia's over across the way with lots and lots of missiles, and we say, we don't need any missiles? That's what they were saying. They would not trust in God. They were trusting in military alliances. And those alliances ended up sifting them, weakening them, and eventually taking them into captivity. Eventually, eventually they lost their reason for existence, and God found no pleasure in them. It goes back to chapter 4, verse 1. Chapter 4, verse 1, we're going to remember it before we're done with this book. It said that they have no faithfulness and no truthfulness. They have no covenant love, and they have no knowledge of God. That is all of their problems. If they could get those three things in shape, everything else would take care of itself. Okay, verse 9. For they have gone up to Assyria like a wild donkey wandering alone. Ephraim has sold herself to lovers. The nations, but there are others also, who are like prostitutes in that they offer friendship and protection at a price. Ultimately, the northern kingdom finds herself like a wild donkey wandering aimlessly in the desert. All of her foreign policy has failed, and she finds nowhere to turn. There's another way to look at it. Usually we see Israel as the prostitute and the nations as her clients. Nevertheless, she eventually finds nobody for which relationship can be bought at a price, and then she finds herself wandering like the lonely donkey in the desert. That's what that verse is all about. Okay, verse 10. Although they have sold themselves among the nations, I will now gather them together. They will begin to waste away under the oppression of the mighty king. So, first, she sold herself and became a vassal to the nations. Talked about vassal last week, right? Became a vassal to the nations. Let's be sure, this gathering, when it's talking about they will be gathered, that is not a gathering of Israel for salvation. That is God gathering Israel for to make war against Israel. Okay? Let's get that straight. Now she will be a captive of the mighty king of Assyria, under which she will waste away. All right. Let's go to verse 11. This 11 through 13 has to do with empty religion. This is what we're going to talk about, religion. How many of y'all think religion is a good thing? We'll talk about it. Let's make sure we understand that religion is deadly. I'll give you a hint. It's not a good thing. It's deadly. Religion is man's attempt to reconcile himself to God. How is the only way man can be reconciled to God? Through Jesus, through faith in Jesus Christ. Okay? Short of that, there is nothing you can do to save yourself. But what has man continually tried to do? Make idols, do things. Let's do ritualistic things that show we're trying to do the right thing. Jesus was anti-religion in that regard as well. He was complaining about incessantly about the way the Jewish leaders treated the people and about the way they related to God. He's including the way they used the temple. He said, "You made my house is his house is a house of prayer, and you've made it into a den of robbers, a den of thieves." All right. The reason religion is so deadly is that it gives people a false sense of security. If you are worshiping in a way which was taught to you as the correct way, why change? If you're raised in a Mormon household, you're raised in a Muslim household, you're raised in a Jewish household, you're raised in a Baptist household, you're taught that's the way to do it. You grow up thinking that's the way to do it. So why change? Actually, why even listen to some reasoning as to why change is needed? That's the situation that religion puts you in. Okay? So let's go to verse 11. Though Ephraim built many altars for sin offerings, these have become altars for sinning. The point is that people built altars for expiating their sins. It was supposed to be a good thing. But these altars became emblems for a false theology, for easy grace. Now, commentary used the term easy grace, where you just go and do something. You make a sacrifice, you give money, you do whatever you do down there at the church house, then you're done. Okay? It's not the condition of your heart, it's the fact that you did it. That's what we're talking about. They became sites even for immorality of fertility cults. We talked about the temple prostitutes and all of that stuff. It was stuff that man did trying to get right with God. For sure, observances of every kind are an offense to God when not combined with a wholehearted devotion to his commandments. God set up the law. He told them what he wanted them to do, but he wanted them to do it for a completely different reason than what they did things for. When they made their sacrifices, well, I've done that, now I'm done. I've done what God wanted. God wanted them to do it out of love for him. There's a difference in what God wanted and religion. That's what I want you to see. According to Leviticus, sacrifices were to be a sweet-smelling aroma that pleased God because people Uh, because people in worship brought forgiveness of sin, but instead they became something God took no pleasure in. God wanted this stuff that he wrote down in the law, the things, the worship procedures, to be a sweet smelling aroma. That's said that way because it's something that would be pleasing to God when he saw the condition of man's heart and the reason he was doing it. But they turned it into something completely different. All right, verse 12. Though Ephraim built many altars for sin offerings, let's see, verse 12. I wrote for them the many things of my law, but they regarded them as something alien. King James says something strange. The ESV and the NASB, I think, say something strange. Isn't that what in 12?
That's a strange thing.
Yeah, a strange thing. The NIV says something alien, something foreign. Okay, the priest had so little respect. You know, we've talked about, I think it was chapter 4 and chapter 5 dealt with the problems with the priest. You know, they knew so little about God and the law that they couldn't instruct the people in anything. So the priest had such a little respect, and the people were so poorly taught that they considered God's law something foreign, or at least something so strange that it cannot be understood. They didn't have their Bible if they could just, they had to depend on what they were told. But Israel's fault was not in the inability of the law to build godly character, But Israel's fault was not in the inability of the law to build godly character, but in her refusal to respond to the revelation of God. Surely, at the beginning of this process, they would have to see changes that were being made were wrong. Because they have not always been messed up, to the extent they are now. But things got worse and worse and worse as time got on. And initially they saw it. They could see it, and they wouldn't do anything about it. It was more fun to go to the high worship places where the temple prostitutes were than it was to understand what God was really expecting of his people. All right, verse 13. They offer sacrifices to me, and they eat the meal, but the Lord is not pleased with them. Now he will remember their wickedness and punish their sins. Most likely, this refers to sacrificial meat served at communal meals. They would take the meat that was sacrificed, and they legally and reasonably, and it was okay to have communal meals with it, which was a good thing. Sharing a meal was considered the high point of fellowship, and probably the Israelites probably enjoyed that. We've heard that. Matt Chandler's talked about that from the pulpit, about sharing a meal with someone was a high point of fellowship, something that people would look forward to when they could do that. But God was not pleased, probably because of the condition of their hearts. Even though it was something that was a good thing, if he can look at your heart and know what your motivations are, then he can either be pleased with that or not pleased with that. He says here that they will end up in Egypt again. Where did I see that? Yeah. Oh, I didn't read the rest of the verse. Turn the page, Kenny. They will return to Egypt. Well, he says that they will end up in Egypt again, where Egypt is used as an idiom to represent bondage. They may physically end up in Egypt, but it could also be an idiom for bondage. They are headed towards captivity under Assyria because they do not know God. That's bondage. Falling under Assyria again. Verse. No, it's okay. I mean, there were certain times that it was okay, and I'm not Levitical law and what their expectations were. I'm not an expert on, but I know that it was okay at times, and that's what these times that where it was okay is what they're talking about. I don't think they were doing anything that was unreasonable or unexpected. It was a condition of their, nothing they did pleased God. I think that's what it got down to. Nothing they did pleased God. It's like we talked about. If you do not accept Christ, you're an enemy of God. That's one thing. That's the only thing you have to do is accept Christ, and you're friends with God. If you don't, then He's not happy with anything you do. And that's kind of the situation these guys were in. God wasn't happy with anything they did. And so this was an okay thing to have a communal meal, but He didn't like it because He knows their motivations, the condition of their heart. It's the best I can do with that. Verse 14. Now, I don't want to belabor this point, but this verse I found to be very interesting. Verse 14 says this: Israel has forgotten his maker. The way they put that is what got my eye. Israel has forgotten his maker and built palaces. Judah has fortified many towns, but I will send fire upon their cities, and that will consume their fortresses. They have forgotten their maker, the one who created them. Is that a fair representation? Let's get that straight before I go on. Is that what we're talking about? God is creator? He didn't say the God who provides salvation. He didn't say the God of love. He didn't say the holy and righteous God. He said the God who created them. You forgot the God who created you. Is that fair? Before I go on, is that fair?
I think he's talking about the nation they were created.
Okay.
That's where I see it.
Well, you just blew off a whole page of my notes here. That is true. That is true. It is. They went into Egypt as a people. They came out as a nation. Right? Right. We are. But I never think of that. Then I know that is true. I know it is true in every respect of what you're saying. But when I saw that as a maker, I saw them as creator. And they forgot him as creator. But either way,
I think it's both ways.
it is both ways, I believe. But the majority of what I'm getting ready to say has to do with God as creator of all. Okay? But I agree with you 100%. They went in as a people, they came out as a nation. Okay. That's no small thing. When Paul was addressing religious idolatry on Mars Hill, he pointed out that they had a place where they had all these gods represented there, but they had one place that had nothing on it. And it was called the God, to the unknown God. That's the God we forgot about, the God we didn't know about. That's just to make sure we got all our bases covered. We got a God for everything we didn't think of. That's what it's all about. When Paul addressed them, he said the God, that unknown God is the God of creation. That's what he told them. He didn't say he's the God of salvation. He's not the God of love. He's not the God, the holy and righteous God. He is the God of creation. You can look it up. It's in Acts 17, verse 22 to 24. Acts 17, verse 22 to 24. He said it is the God of creation. Now, the reason I'm even bringing this up is because I'm getting a little aggravated about the way people look at that as the God of creation. It has come to be known as, whether you believe in God as a creation, the 6-day creation, or that He created everything, is a negotiable point. It's not a point of salvation. So initially, it's not important what you necessarily believe about that. What is important, the non-negotiable point is Jesus Christ is Savior. Okay, once you get that straight, then you can go back and work out all the other stuff you may not want to believe. Well, I've changed my mind about that. I believe it is a non-negotiable point. Not for salvation, but I don't believe that you can fully understand Christ without fully understanding what God did in the very first words out of the Bible. Well, we just talk about created, that He was creator of everything. Yeah, except that people have taken that and turned it into evolution. People in the church, in this church right here, I'll bet you, well, I know for a fact, there are some people believe that if God chose evolution to create, and that's a totally, what do you call that? It's not even something that makes sense. You don't create by evolution, you evolve. Creation is a totally different thing. Okay, so I saw that as a non-negotiable point. Israel knew it, and they forgot it. Now, if it has a dual meaning, they were created in Egypt. They went in as a people that came out as a nation. They're created that way. They're also created by God as a person and as a world and a universe. They forgot all that too. They forgot both of those things. And we know it as well. All right, so let me just, 2 Peter 3, 5, and 6 says that we forgot it as well. All right, let me keep going. So it goes on to say that they built palaces. Now we're back on track. It goes on to say they built palaces, which means they were built in some name other than God, the God of creation. God is not even in the picture, is what I'm trying to get to. They built palaces, but they weren't built in His name. They were built in somebody else's name. It sounds exactly like Nimrod to me. Nimrod, you know what Nimrod did? What did he build that's noteworthy? Tower of Babel. That's what he built. Why did he build it? Come on, y'all, help me. To reach the heavens, but he had a reason. That's true too, but there's a specific reason. I think it actually says it. We're going to make a name for ourselves. Okay? And that name had nothing to do with God. His wife was, Nimrod was a great warrior, and he built fortresses. In fact, in mythology, his wife was the first deified female. Remember, we went through all that. We studied Revelation. She was the first deified female, and she was the goddess of fortresses. Judah, in verse 14, verse 14 says, they built fortresses that were probably not in God's name either. Let me see what 14 said again. It said, Judah, yeah, he's talking to Israel. Then he jumps into Judah. Judah had fortified their towns as well. Well, they weren't built in God's name either. He says he will send fire to their town. There, meaning Judah and the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom are both going to be recipients of that, and they will be consumed. The fire came from Assyria for the northern kingdom. It came from Babylon for the southern kingdom. Fortresses and military strength is folly to God. Israel spent all kinds of time and money on flawed military alliances where trust in God should be all that was needed. Now it's hard to say that in the 21st century Western world. We've got China. We've got all of the Middle East that would probably love to bomb us out of existence if they could. And Russia. And Isaiah would say we don't need military might. But the reason that it's such a hard thing to accept now is because we've come a long way from when Isaiah was walking the earth. Things have not always been like it is now. Okay? But it has always been man against man. And sometimes you trust God, sometimes you don't. All right. Let me do a couple of verses out of verse 9, and then we'll let it go for the day. Verse 9 has got 5 big points to it. Verse 1 and 2 deals with the death of joy. This is really an incredible chapter. The death of joy. 3 through 6 deals with the exile from their land. 7 through 9 deals with the loss of spiritual discernment. 10 through 16 deals with the declining birth rate. And verse 17 deals with them being cast out. So let's just look at the first couple of verses, and then we'll call it a day. Verse 1. Those 5 points, by the way, are the penalty for their ingratitude. They have forsaken God, and God will forsake them. That's what happens. That's what this is all about. We talked about those first 3 chapters where we had Hosea and Gomer. Remember that? With forsaking and all of that stuff that went with an unstable marriage was about God forsaking Israel because Israel had completely forsaken them. Remember we said forsaking, to forget is an accident. You accidentally forget something. But when you forsake something, it is purely 100% intentional. And that's what Israel did to God. All right, so verse 1 says this, chapter 9. Do not rejoice, O Israel. Do not be jubilant like the other nations, for you have been unfaithful to your God. You love the wages of a prostitute at every threshing floor. At every threshing floor, at every harvest is what we're talking about. Israel had erroneously attributed their prosperity of the harvest to Baal. Something given to them by God, they attributed to Baal. Now they were forbidden to rejoice. This was no time for joy. Do not rejoice. There is no time for joy. It's not a command. It looks like a command. It's more of an idiom than a command, for joy will not be possible. What's coming is going to make joy an impossibility. She had become an adulteress, offering worship to Baal and receiving from Baal the wages of a prostitute. With all of the material blessings of the harvest from God, the Israelites attributed it to Baal. All right, verse 2. Threshing floors and wine presses will not feed the people. The new wine will fail them. The plentiful harvest was about to end. God is going to turn that off. The plentiful harvests are about to end. God is about to take it back. Let me go back to chapter 2, verses 9 through 12, just as a reminder. We've talked about this before. Chapter 2, verses 9 through 12. Therefore I will take away my grain when it ripens, and my new wine when it is ready. I will take back my wool and my linen, intended to cover her nakedness. So now I will expose her lewdness before the eyes of her lovers. No one will take her out of my hands. I will stop all of her celebrations, her yearly festivals, her new moons, her Sabbath days, all her appointed feasts. And all that has to do with the harvest, by the way. I will ruin her vines and her fig trees, which she said were her pay from her lovers. I will make them a thicket, and wild animals will devour them. I will punish her for days. I think I said stop there. So, where he gave plentiful harvest, he's taken all that back. I'm going to stop there because it gets into a new point.